This video is part 2 of Stoic Freedom and the Desire for External Goods, and you can find a link to the first part in the description section below. In the first video on this topic, we outlined Epictetus' argument from freedom and explained its first premise, which contains a statement of the Stoic conception of freedom. It is a conception in which true freedom does not hinge upon having favorable life circumstances, nor does true freedom require the power to make the world bend to our wishes. In fact, these are the very tendencies which only serve to undermine our freedom. Rather, true freedom is found through having these sorts of wishes and desires that is within our power to satisfy. It is a conception of freedom which requires self-discipline and self-control instead of unbridled self-expression or immediate satisfaction. In this video, we will complete our examination of Epictetus' argument by considering the implications of this notion of freedom. Ultimately, because no external goods are within our power, achieving genuine freedom requires getting rid of our desire for external goods. While this does not mean that we can never pursue any goals at all, it does mean we need to be able to separate ourselves from the success or failure of our pursuits, and learn to accept failure with stoic indifference. It is only in this way that we can achieve real and lasting freedom. Furthermore, as Epictetus puts it, it is only in this way that we can vanquish the tyrants within and achieve self-mastery. Epictetus' argument from freedom contends that we cannot live freely if we desire external goods, and that as a result, nobody should desire external goods. The argument relies upon the distinctively Stoic conception of freedom that is expressed in the first premise of the argument. A person can only live freely if they are able to satisfy their desires and avoid their aversions. We refer to this as the Stoic principle of freedom. Now, if this principle is correct, then that means we need to think carefully about how we can best ensure that our desires are satisfied. And there seem to be roughly two different strategies that one could employ. One strategy would be to make ourselves powerful enough, capable enough, and resilient enough to satisfy even the most ambitious desires. So powerful, capable, and resilient that we can defeat any obstacle that comes our way. We would work to be the best qualified candidate for our dream job, safe from the calamity of financial misfortune, immune to disease and injury, and highly desirable as a friend or spouse. We would permit ourselves to desire external goods like power, success, wealth, health, and reputation, and then orient all our efforts toward achieving these things. Yet, if the key to freedom really is ensuring that our desires are satisfied, then we might think, why bother with pursuing such ambitious goals? Why not strive after something more realistic, more attainable? Wouldn't our success be more likely if our desires were less bold? It is this approach that is recommended by Epictetus. The second premise of the argument states that it is only possible for one to live as one desires and not suffer one's aversions if one desires what is within our power. And this point is explained nicely in the following statement from the Enchiridion. You can be unconquerable if you enter into no combat in which it is not in your own power to conquer. The free person, according to Epictetus, is someone who is unconquerable. But why is this? And what does it mean to be unconquerable in the first place? Think about what it is like to not get what you want. When we want something but cannot have it, we feel defeated, dejected, we might even feel like a failure. When we wish to avoid something but are unable to do so, we feel helpless, powerless, and vulnerable. It seems that in such cases, we have been conquered by our desires or our aversions. We have been conquered by a desired goal that was too difficult for us to achieve. Or we have been conquered by an aversive situation that we could not prevent or could not escape. However, based upon the Stoic principle of freedom, we know that the free person never has to suffer the defeat of unfulfilled desire or the powerlessness of enduring a dreaded aversion. Consequently, the free person can never be conquered. But it is important to understand why the free person is never conquered. It is not because the free person can overcome any obstacle. Those who have achieved Stoic freedom are just as vulnerable and helpless in the face of chance as the rest of us. In fact, because they have an accurate sense of what is within their power, they are actually acutely aware of their limitations and vulnerabilities. Instead, the free person is unconquerable because the free person picks her battles wisely. As Epictetus puts it, the free person never enters into any combat which is not within her power to conquer. In other words, the free person never desires anything beyond her power. The free person recognizes that it is not within her power to secure her dream job, become wealthy, guarantee herself good health, or be well liked. These are not battles that she knows she can win. For that reason, the free person gives up any desire for wealth, success, health, and reputation because disappointment is the inevitable consequence of attaching ourselves to these things. While any desire for an external good will ultimately undermine our freedom, certain desires are particularly futile. Among these would be the desire for what is unrealistic or even impossible. But if we are honest with ourselves, as strange as it may seem in the abstract, such desires are actually quite common. As examples, Epictetus calls those foolish who wish for their children, wife, or friends to live forever, or who wish their servant was without fault. We all know that nobody lives forever, yet we cannot help but fall into despair when a loved one dies, despite this outcome being entirely predictable. We also know that all human beings are flawed, but we find ourselves becoming annoyed, agitated, and resentful when people make mistakes. These reactions are the result of unrealistic desires that contradict what we know is true about the world. Only a fool laments death because it is unreasonable to think it won't occur. Only a fool becomes angry at the faults of others because human imperfection is universal. These unrealistic expectations and desires undermine our freedom by making us dependent upon what cannot be achieved. These points bring into sharper relief the claim that no external circumstance, not even that of being held as a slave, can prevent us from being free. Just as true freedom comes from within, from developing the right sort of character, so genuine slavery also comes from within, from developing the wrong sort of character. Whatever genuine form of slavery we face is a type of self-enslavement. Epictetus makes this point in the following Enchiridion passage. A man's master is he who is able to confer or remove whatever that man seeks or shuns. Whoever then would be free, let him wish nothing, let him decline nothing which depends on others, else he must necessarily be a slave. To be a slave is to be under the absolute authority of some master, and a master is someone who has the ability to determine whether another person's desires will be met, or to confer or remove whatever that man seeks or shuns. So, we are only enslaved when something external determines whether we can live as we wish. Thus, the recipe for avoiding slavery is really quite simple. Never desire what depends on something outside of ourselves. If we follow this advice, then nothing another person does, including putting us in literal bondage, can prevent us from satisfying our desires. If we fail to follow this advice by desiring some external good, then our ability to live as we wish will always depend on something over which we have no control. Not only will we be a slave, but we will bear ultimate responsibility for our own slavery. We will have enslaved ourselves. From the outside, the powerful politician or wealthy CEO may seem like the epitome of freedom. But if they are driven by an overwhelming desire for power, fame, wealth, and success, then even they have enslaved themselves to their own desires. The only remedy for this, of course, is to desire only that which is within our power. Drawing the conclusion that nobody who desires external goods can live freely requires a third premise. It is the claim that no external goods are within our power. This is, of course, a foundational claim of the Stoic philosophy. Despite our best efforts, obtaining any external good will always depend upon chance to some degree. Still, Epictetus recognizes how easily we can succumb to the illusion that freedom is attained through the pursuit of external goods. In the Discourses, Epictetus uses an example which, given his own experience as a slave, very well may have been autobiographical. He presents the perspective of an enslaved person who longs to be released from constraint. And through this presentation, he invites us to contemplate what really underlies the slave's desire for freedom. The slave wishes to be set free immediately. Why? Do you think that he wishes to pay money to the collectors of the 20ths? No, but because he imagines that hitherto, through not having obtained this, he is hindered and unfortunate. If I shall be set free, immediately it is all happiness. I care for no man. I speak to all as an equal and like to them. I go where I choose. I come from any place I choose, and go where I choose. The slave longs for freedom because he believes that if only he were free, then he wouldn't be hindered and unfortunate. He could come and go as he pleases, and finally, he would be happy. Of course, there is some truth to this. Once released, he will have greater freedom of movement and greater ability to choose how he will live. However, new freedoms blind him to the fact that despite his radical change of circumstance, he would still not yet have achieved genuine freedom. The slave's way of thinking assumes that achieving freedom is a matter of securing the right circumstances. If only he were in better circumstances, then all would be happiness. But this gets things precisely backwards. Genuine freedom is a matter of developing the right sort of character. Once free, the slave is no longer held in bondage, but that does not mean that he is no longer in a state of dependence. Then he is set free, Epictetus imagines, and forthwith, having no place where he can eat, he looks for some man to flatter, someone with whom he shall sup. Then he works with his body and endures the most dreadful things, and falls into a slavery much worse than his former slavery. Once freed, the former slave's basic needs will still need to be met, and this will make it necessary for him to work for another person or flatter another person who can provide that for him. He may have to engage in hard manual labor or something else dreadful just to obtain food and shelter. Keep in mind Epictetus' definition of what it means to be a slave. A slave is someone dependent upon another for the satisfaction of his desires. Despite his seemingly radical change in circumstances, the former slave still finds himself dependent upon something outside of himself. Thus, he has still not yet achieved genuine freedom. As such, the profound transformation of his life circumstance that he had so longed for has still not yet delivered what it promised. He has merely traded slavery to one master for slavery to many masters. As Epictetus puts it, The former slave, desperate to flatter and appease anyone who will give him what he wants, is now a wretched man who must say to himself, "What things I suffer, being a slave of many instead of to one." The point Epictetus is making here about the nature of freedom does not only apply to those who are disadvantaged and impoverished. It is not only true or useful for those who must meet their basic needs through wage labor. In fact, not even the most powerful can achieve true freedom through their favorable circumstances alone. Even someone so powerful that they answer to Caesar alone still must develop their character if they want to become free. Such a person still has one master who can compel them, and it doesn't matter that Caesar, as emperor, is the master of everyone in society. This just means he is a slave in a great family. The error we fall into here is that of equating freedom with political and social power. Certainly, the friends of Caesar who enjoy the advantages of wealth and privilege are more powerful in a certain sense than a newly freed slave. Yet, if true freedom requires complete self-sufficiency, then not even the most powerful and privileged can claim to be free merely in virtue of their advantageous circumstances. If the aforementioned slave were to put the finishing stroke on his career by becoming a senator, then he would only find himself serving the finer and most splendid slavery of political life. That is, the dependence that senators have upon gaining the favor of voters or the need to make political compromises. The problem here does not lie so much with the political life itself as it does with the idea that real freedom can be won through gaining enough political power, influence, and sway. The same error is committed by the person who thinks that he is not yet free because Caesar is not yet favorable to him. If only he could befriend Caesar, then he would finally have real independence and autonomy. Again, the error here is that of believing that the possession of political and social power is what makes one free. Furthermore, Epictetus believes we fall into this error because we don't know how to adapt the preconceptions. But what does Epictetus mean by preconception? Roughly speaking, a preconception is a basic moral principle. Using Epictetus' example, one preconception would be that we should avoid what is bad and hurtful. Of course, this is not very controversial in itself. Any human being who understands the words bad and hurtful would likely agree with this. However, people do differ when they apply this preconception or when they adapt it to practical circumstances and courses of action. And this is what Epictetus is referring to when he talks about adapting a preconception. Again, take the preconception that which is bad and hurtful should be avoided. All may agree about this in the abstract, but there will be disagreement about what is bad and hurtful when it comes to particulars. For example, Epictetus imagines someone who thinks it is bad and hurtful to lack Caesar's favor and friendship. Now, given Epictetus' view about harm, this is obviously an illusion. Nothing external can harm us unless we permit it to do so. This means there's nothing inherently bad about Caesar not showing us favor. This can only hinder our freedom if we are attached to political power. Otherwise, this can't really do us any harm. So, the person who laments his inability to curry favor with Caesar has failed to properly adapt or apply the concepts of bad and hurtful. This is why he who pines for Caesar's friendship is gone far from the mark. He has missed the adaptation. To understand why the pursuit of political power cannot make us free, we need to think further about what we are trying to achieve through the pursuit of political power, and whether pursuit of political power really can help us achieve that end. Epictetus asks, "For what is that which every man seeks? To live secure, to be happy, to do everything as he wishes, not to be hindered nor compelled? When then he has become the friend of Caesar, is he free from hindrance? Free from compulsion? Is he tranquil? Is he happy? Does having powerful friends make us happier, more independent, and less subject to restraint? We can only answer this question by asking Caesar's friends. What more trustworthy witness have we than this very man who is become Caesar's friend? Come forward and tell us, when did you sleep more quietly, now or before you became Caesar's friend? Upon reflection, Epictetus's imagined interlocutor realizes he has become more restrained since winning Caesar's favor. Well, when did you sup with more pleasure, now or before? Hear what he says about this also. He says that if he is not invited, he is pained. And if he is invited, he sups like a slave with his master, all the while being anxious that he does not say or do anything foolish. When we need to please powerful people to get what we want, then we become dependent upon those powerful people to maintain our status and position. If we are not invited to dine with Caesar, then we worry we are losing our favored position. On the other hand, if we are invited to dine with Caesar, then we immediately become anxious. We worry about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, or acting in a way that will offend the wrong people. When our fate hinges upon our ability to please the powerful, fear is the necessary result. We become afraid of being lashed like a slave or even losing our head. The powerful can both give us great benefits and great harm. Or at least they have such power over us if we become attached to what they control. Thus, it is only those who are stupid or ignorant of the truth who do not bewail their misfortunes the nearer they are to friendship with Caesar. All of this reinforces the Stoic claim that no external good is within our power. We think we can attain political power and thereby, by doing that, become free. But in doing so, we only make ourselves dependent upon the whims of dictators and tyrants. Even Caesar himself, powerful as he was assassinated in the Senate just 5 years after becoming the dictator of Rome. The possession and maintenance of external goods like power, status, and reputation are never completely within our control. As such, Epictetus critiques the tendency, just as common today as it was in the 2nd century, to envy wealth and power. When therefore you see anyone eminent in honors or power or in high esteem on any other account, take heed not to be bewildered by appearances and to pronounce him happy. For if the essence of good consists in things within our power, there will be no room for envy or emulation. The powerful emperor, wealthy business person, or famous celebrity are no more immune to the chance and fortune of life than anyone else. In fact, maintaining their status likely requires all manner of flattery and self-debasement. They have no more ultimate control over their fate than anyone else. Neither are they necessarily any happier or any closer to achieving the good. So if that is true, then we have no reason to envy them. We certainly have no reason to let jealousy distract us from the more important task of disciplining the will and controlling our desires. This means that we should not desire to be a general or a senator or a consul, but we should desire to be free. And the only way to this is a disregard of things which lie not within our own power. Thus, we arrive at the first conclusion of the argument from freedom. Nobody who desires external goods can live freely. The person who desires external goods desires a change in their circumstances. They are enslaved and want to be released from constraint. They are poor, but they want to be rich, powerless, but want to be powerful. without any friends, but they want to be popular. But any desire for a change in circumstance is a desire for something beyond our control. Furthermore, even if we do manage to achieve the circumstantial change we desire, maintaining that situation requires placing ourselves in a situation of dependence. The former slave is now dependent upon wage labor to support his newfound independence. The powerful politician is dependent upon public support to maintain her elected position. The only way, then, to achieve true independence and freedom is to let go of all desire for external goods. For it is only in this way that we can ensure that no person and no thing is a master over us. Upon hearing this, however, we might conclude that Stoic freedom is impossible. Stoic freedom requires complete independence from anything outside ourselves. But no person can really live like that. We are all dependent upon family, friends, employers, and the community in general for all manner of things that we need and want. So how is such independence possible? Consider Epictetus' point about the former slave who, once freed, must work to be clothed and fed. That is true, but what is the alternative? Does a Stoic life require that we don't do anything, even in pursuit of basic goals? Does it require that I not even desire what is needed to sustain my own life? I do not think that is the case. Epictetus is not arguing that we should never do anything or that we necessarily undermine our freedom by pursuing even the most primitive goals. There is nothing inherently wrong or self-enslaving with meeting our survival needs. There is not even necessarily anything wrong with pursuing the more ambitious goals of power, success, wealth, and health. What matters is how we pursue these things. Epictetus thinks that what is most important is not the actions that we take in pursuit of external goods, but the nature of our desire for these things. And this is because desire implies some kind of attachment, the sort of attachment that can lead to frustration and disappointment. Suppose a politician campaigns for political office with the intention of enacting legislation that will help her community thrive. Has she thereby enslaved herself to the outcome of winning the election? Well, that depends upon the way in which she desires electoral success. It depends upon how she might be affected if she were to fail in pursuit of this goal. If the thought of losing the election throws her into a state of despair, then certainly she has attached herself to electoral success, an outcome which is beyond her control, in a way that would undermine her freedom. But suppose her attitude is different. Suppose she resolves to do everything in her power to win, but also recognizes that the result is ultimately out of her hands. She works as hard as she can toward the goal, but would react with calm, stoic indifference if she loses. In that case, this politician would not desire electoral success in the sense Epictetus warns us against. Consequently, her political career could be consistent with achieving Stoic freedom. No matter what the goal is, the general message here remains the same. What undermines our freedom is not the actions we take in pursuit of some goal, but the inability to recognize that success in any domain of life is never within our power, and as such, that attaching ourselves to success will inevitably cause the disappointment of frustrated desire. As such, it is entirely possible to act in the world and pursue our ends while also achieving Stoic freedom. Stoic freedom does not require a life of inaction and passivity. Now, suppose that Stoic freedom is reasonably possible within what we would recognize as a normal human life. This still leaves open the following question: is such freedom desirable? Is it worth pursuing? This is the point addressed in the fourth premise of the argument from freedom. Epictetus believes that freedom is worthwhile and valuable because there is an essential connection between freedom and happiness. He describes freedom as the greatest good and tells us that nobody who has achieved freedom can be unhappy or fare badly. This is why we can confidently declare that those who are unhappy, unfortunate, and lamenting cannot be free. Even a great king, if he is depressed and frustrated, must also have failed to achieve Stoic freedom. In another passage, Epictetus describes freedom as something great and noble, and this is why we can confidently affirm that those who are mean or those who are lacking in dignity are not free. Those who lack Stoic freedom are driven by their desire for power, status, and all other sorts of external goods. They make themselves subject to another and put themselves in a position where they must flatter those in power to get what they want. In doing so, they only succeed in making themselves little slaves by debasing themselves for small things, or great slaves if they do this for the sake of great things. I think the very fact that Epictetus insists upon Stoic freedom being the greatest good once again demonstrates what is distinctive about the Stoic notion of freedom. If we think, as the Stoics do not, that freedom is merely a lack of constraint, then it is not obvious that freedom would be the greatest good. Again, the fact that someone has no external constraints upon their actions does not mean that that person is living well. The drug addict, alcoholic, compulsive gambler, or habitual liar do not seem better off when left to their own devices. Rather, it is precisely because of their lack of constraint that they end up in ruin. However, for the Stoics, freedom is not merely lack of an external constraint. For the Stoics, freedom is a substantive achievement that takes diligence and hard work. The free person in the Stoic sense can live as she wishes because she has controlled her desires. The free person is not attached to any external good and consequently is never upset, anxious, troubled, or frustrated. Because the free person focuses only on what she can control, the free person is never unhappy. This explains why Epictetus takes freedom to be the greatest good. Freedom is not something we have in addition to happiness. Rather, Stoic freedom is happiness. Freedom and happiness are but two ways of describing precisely the same state of affairs, that of living well. From this additional premise, we get the argument's final conclusion. If the desire for external goods undermines our freedom, and if freedom is the greatest good, then it follows that nobody should desire external goods. As Epictetus explains, is it possible that he who desires any of the things which depend on others can be free from hindrance? No. Is it possible for him to be unimpeded? No. Therefore, he cannot be free. While here we have focused on the external goods of political power, status, and independence, the same can be said of any external good. As Epictetus points out in this passage, we must give up our desire for anything not within our power. Health, attractiveness, our estate, clothes, house, horses, our children, our family, and even our life itself. Attachment to any of these things, to anything beyond our power, necessarily prevents us from becoming free and obtaining that which is the greatest good. Now that we have a better understanding of the Stoic conception of freedom, we should return to the previous distinction we made between thinking that freedom is a matter of circumstance versus thinking that freedom is a matter of character. For Epictetus, freedom is entirely independent of our circumstances. This is what makes freedom available to those of high birth as well as those of low birth, to those who are slaves and those who are emperors. It is the reason why, when thinking about whether someone is free, we need not look after his grandfathers and great-grandfathers or inquire about his being bought or sold. Whether we were born a slave or born under the rule of an oppressive tyrant, those things are irrelevant. For these are all matters relating to our circumstances instead of our character. In fact, it is not the tyrants outside of us that we need to be concerned about. Rather, it is the tyrants within us. We need to abolish the acropolis which is in us and cast out the tyrants within. We are so conditioned to think that freedom is achieved through an improvement in our circumstances. We are so conditioned to think that our lack of freedom is due to some person or system outside of ourselves that we fail to see the way in which what enslaves us and what hinders our freedom is internal to our character. It is not the arbitrary whims of an unjust dictator, an unfair political system, or even a general lack of opportunity that prevents us from being free. Instead, it is the temptation we face to pursue power, wealth, status, fame, reputation, possessions, and pleasure in an immoderate and undisciplined way. These temptations are the tyrants within, which, if not conquered and vanquished, prevent us from achieving happiness, freedom, and human flourishing. Furthermore, the only way to overcome these temptations and vanquish the tyrants within is by giving up our concern for external goods, giving up the body, the possessions, the reputation, magisterial offices, honors, children, brothers, friends, by considering all these things as belonging to others. The greatest good of Stoic freedom, then, is readily available to us. But we will never obtain it as long as we focus on overcoming external forces of oppression and constraint. It is only when we realize that the real enslavement we suffer is our own doing, and that it can only be overcome through a battle within ourselves, that we can finally achieve genuine freedom.